by CII in collaboration with the US Consulate in Mumbai. The first session in this series really focused on India's economic engagement and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. And in today's session, our panel of experts will discuss strengthening US-India pharma cooperation and vaccine diplomacy. Indeed, a very timely and very topical discussion given how the global impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has hurt economies, has disrupted global supply chains, and overwhelmed the world's healthcare infrastructure. The ongoing threat that it presents has been the most demanding on our public health systems since the 1918 influenza pandemic. And the backbone required for efficient pandemic and disaster management really rests today on every nation's healthcare infrastructure, critical research and development facilities, and the pharmaceutical industry. Vaccine Maitri, which is a program arising from Prime Minister Modi's vision to leverage India's vaccine production and delivery capacity to help all of humanity, has not only vaccinated 82 million of its own citizens, but also delivered over 64 million doses of vaccines to 82 countries, several under grant and several as commercial contracts. India has also facilitated the supply of vaccines to UN health workers and is gifting vaccines to UN peacekeepers as well. This initiative of supplying COVID-19 vaccines to the world has been widely appreciated by several organizations, including the United Nations, the World Health Organization, governments around the world, and public at large as well. And this major diplomatic effort has helped raise India's global stature. But the sector is not without its own challenges. We are constantly trying to strive a balance between innovation and technology and access and affordability. Let us delve deeper into this discussion and talk with the people who are experts on the ground, who are engaged in this effort, and let's get their perspectives on how they're doing what they're doing and what challenges and opportunities they see in the current era, as well as in the forthcoming sort of post-COVID situation. And how can we enable even greater, closer cooperation between India and the US on pharma and healthcare industry? We are privileged to have a panel of experts who have joined us today. And without further ado, let me start with our introductions. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. David Rance, Consul General, US Consulate in Mumbai. David assumed this position in August of 2019, and since then has done an absolutely stellar job of engaging diverse stakeholders in the US-India landscape and enabling greater discussion on a range of important topics, from trade and investment to strategic regional cooperation, women's empowerment, and today on pharmaceutical cooperation. So thank you, David, for everything that you're doing. David's a career diplomat since 1992 and has been a member of the Senior Foreign Service, a class of Minister Counselor, and has previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia. No better person to guide us on the US-India framework today. Our moderator for this session will be Mr. Sanjay Gupta, who's the CEO of the US business for Torrent Pharmaceuticals. Sanjay has a background in setting up and operating pharma business in developed and emerging markets. He joined Torrent Pharma in 2012, and he's also an active member of CII's India Business Forum in the US. We have with us Mrs. Suchitra Ella, co-founder of Bharat Biotech, vaccine and biotherapeutics manufacturing India's developed vaccine. Mrs. Ella graduated in economics and philosophy, two very distinct and very interesting topics from the University of Madras, and further specialized in business and marketing through executive education in Madison, Wisconsin, and estate management in South Carolina in the US. Later, she added on a postgraduate diploma in patent law from Nalsar in India. She co-founded Bharat Biotech in 1996, and she's also played a very active role as the chairperson of CII's India Women Network. We have Dr. Suresh Yadav, who's the co-chairman of CII's National Committee on Biotech and executive director of Serum Institute India. And in over 48 plus years of his experience, he has to his credit 2 patents in his name. He is ranked as the 7th most influential in the world's 50 most influential people in vaccines. And he is also actively involved in the development of vaccines against the COVID-19 infection. And we have Jonathan Kimball, Vice President of Trade for International Affairs, Association for Accessible Medicines, AAM. He serves as a senior strategist and advocate to direct international trade strategy at AAM and represents the association and its members' interests before the US governments and agencies such as the US Trade Representative, US Department of Commerce, members of the US Congress, White House, and other stakeholders. Such a pleasure to have all of you join us today. Thank you to all of our guests for logging in. We had an overwhelming response of 400 plus registrations for this discussion. So thank you for your interest and for supporting our program. We will have a small question and answer round at the end of the session. So if you have questions, please type them up in the Q&A box on your screens, and time permitting, we will pick up a few questions from there. And before I actually ask David to come on for his remarks, may I request everybody to give us a big smile for the virtual camera now that we have to do screenshots instead of cameras and meet virtually instead of in person. Those are great smiles. Thank you so much. I think we got it. And with that, let me request U.S. Consul General in Mumbai, David Rands, to please deliver your remarks.
Thank you so much, Sushita. Hello, everyone. Good morning, America. Good evening, India. On behalf of the U.S. Consulate General in Mumbai, thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. It gives me immense pleasure to open this discussion on strengthening U.S.-India pharma cooperation and vaccine diplomacy. We're pleased to support today's discussion through a grant to CII and grateful to its team for organizing this important and timely discussion. Here in Mumbai, reflecting on Maharashtra Chief Minister Thackeray's recent announcement of statewide night and weekend curfews coupled with closures of cinemas, restaurants, and other restrictions, evokes a familiar mix of feelings. Of course, sadness at the growing toll this pandemic is taking on lives and health, a somber acknowledgement of the sacrifices we must make to protect the most vulnerable in our communities, sympathy for affected business owners and workers, and more selfishly, a small sense of loss as a person who loves to travel and explore Mumbai's amazing culinary and cultural scene. In many ways, it feels like a repeat of the spring of 2020, but with one critical difference. Last year, we didn't know when or how it would ever end. This year, we have real reason for hope, thanks to the multiple vaccines that have been developed in the US, India, and elsewhere. That in just 1 year, we have multiple COVID-19 vaccines being jabbed into millions of arms around the world each day is simply amazing and a testament to the international partnerships in health and biomedical research. The India-US partnership is at the forefront of this extraordinary international mobilization, with cutting-edge research and game-changing manufacturing capacities in both our countries. The US and India have partnered on research and development of vaccines under the Indo-US Vaccine Action Program. We have addressed infectious disease outbreaks, strengthened health systems, and worked together to secure global supply chains. Together, we have worked to benefit people around the world. Tragically, the United States has suffered over 500,000 COVID deaths, more than any other country in the world, which is why President Biden is very focused on fulfilling his responsibility to get Americans vaccinated. At the same time, we know this is a global pandemic and viruses recognize no borders, which is why the US is providing $4 billion, more than any other country in the world, to COVAX, the global initiative aimed at equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. This is also why the US has re-engaged with the World Health Organization, and why in March, President Biden and his Quad counterparts from India, Japan, and Australia announced a partnership to achieve expanded manufacturing of safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines at facilities in India. Last year's shortage of PPE and the current efforts by national governments to secure vaccines for their citizens have in some cases unfortunately stoked calls for cutting or restricting global supply chains. Some argue that a country can only ensure its security by producing key goods at home. I believe this is the wrong lesson to learn. Taking the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as an example, it was developed by a team in the Netherlands for a Belgian subsidiary of the American company. And as part of the plan announced at the Quad Summit, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC, will financially assist Hyderabad-based drug manufacturer Biological E to produce doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to be exported for global benefit. This is just one example of how international cooperation benefits the world. Anyone who has ever heard me speak about the US-India relationship has likely heard me say that when the history books are written, I believe ours will be one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century. When it comes to our cooperation on COVID-19 vaccines, one can practically hear the scratch of the historian's pen. It is truly remarkable. I would like to thank everyone who worked to put this event together, especially the CII International and US offices. Our panel today includes a remarkable collection of world-renowned speakers. Thanks to Sanjay Gupta, Suchitra Ella, Suresh Yadav, and Jonathan Kimball for making the time to participate in what I am positive will be an interesting and informative discussion. And a special thanks to the consulate's own Amrita de Mello, who has insisted on continuing to coordinate these excellent CIA discussions while on parental leave. Finally, thanks to all of you who have tuned in. And with that, back over to you, Sushita.
Thank you, David. Absolutely. Thanks to you and your team. I didn't know Amrita was on parental leave, so thank you so much for continuing your efforts to do so, and congratulations. With that, let me turn it over to Sanjay. Sanjay, this is the floor is yours. Please go ahead with the discussion.
Suchita. To put together a more timely panel than this one in today's world. So on Monday, we saw that India recorded over 100,000 new cases in the previous 24 hours, making India only the second country after the US to cross a 100,000 case threshold in a single day. The US itself recorded about 63,000 cases on the same day. So while India suffered from a high disease burden, together we've also had great successes in developing, manufacturing, and administrative vaccines against COVID-19. To date, the two countries have together administered over 250 million doses of the COVID vaccine. I heard yesterday the US Secretary of State say that the pandemic won't end at home until it ends worldwide. So the objective today for our discussion is to discuss how these two leading countries can further pool their strengths for the benefits of their citizens and the world. The strengths are quite remarkable and complementary. The US is a leader in innovation, and India is the pharmacy of the world with large-scale, cost-efficient manufacturing for high-quality medicines. Our panelists today are making effort to get people in India and around the world. And our third panelist has also ensured life-saving medicines are accessible affordably and globally. Much ado, let's begin. I would like to begin with the question that is on top of my mind. As more and more people are getting vaccinated, we also see a high number of cases in many parts of the world. In the US, we attribute that to the variants, the UK variant, the California variant, the New York variant. So, Dr. Jadhav, Mrs. Ella, are the vaccines that we have today, are they capable of fighting against these mutations? Dr. Jadhav?
Dr. Jadhav, you are on mute.
Extremely sorry. Yeah. No, in my opinion, yes, because I think most of the companies who are already working and trying to see the effect on the various mutants, whether it is South African, Brazilian, Californian, or even from UK, with the current vaccine, they are getting neutralized. But whether it will continue to happen in the future, I have got my own doubts, because I think the mutation is a continuous process. And we have heard recently in India that there was a double mutation. So we will have to see whether these new mutants which are coming are also getting neutralized. But to get those results will take some time.
Thank you, Dr. Jadhav. It's a pleasure meeting you again, though virtually. I hope you remember me from the past and the many times that we would have, met and run into our own sectoral meetings and events that have taken place all over the world. It's good evening to all of you. To add to what Dr. Jadhav has just mentioned, we will have to kind of give it a wait and a watch kind of a approach, because all of our vaccines, irrespective of the countries that they have been coming from, be it Europe or the US or India in particular, I think our data spans under 12 months. And most of these mutations are happening as we, as the days are rolling on. I would just only like to add by saying that there is some positive news because the vaccine that we at Bharat have developed is a whole virion platform technology based on a virocell platform technology, and it is a whole virion. The complete virus is inactivated. It's an inactivated vaccine, and the entire cell of the virus has been deployed into it. We have conducted so far, the UK mutant has been tested with our vaccine at the NIV Pune, and we have shown that it has successfully neutralized it. We are also doing continuous research and testing of this vaccine with the other mutations that are happening as well. But we don't know how many of the mutations that we could handle. But as of now, it looks like it is quite good, at least for the ones that we have in India, which came, of course, from Italy during the early part of last year. And the Brazil variant also, I think we are fairly successful in running our vaccine against that. And the South African one is still under progress. So there is work which is happening as we speak. And this is just, it's going to take time. I think none of us would probably have answers right away for it. It's one day at a time. However, I mean, it's difficult, yeah.
So, you have decades-long experience with those viruses, with different viruses, because, both of you have very broad, treatments and vaccines against a broad variety of vaccines. Is this virus very unusual compared to everything you have seen in the past? How is it something unique about it that, we are seeing all these variants coming at such a rapid pace?
I think, yes, in a way, it is a new virus. And that's one of the reasons why WHO named it as N coronavirus. It's a new coronavirus. It's not the old one. Because the old ones, what we were normally used to see are the SARS, MERS, or even the influenza viruses or the Ebola one. The original mechanism which was seen in Wuhan and I think the medical progression which was seen in the patients was little disheartening at that time, because it was affecting the lungs, it was affecting the blood clotting system, and it was not getting corrected by the existing drugs. So one has to really work on this particular disease to find out what will be the best treatment. And fortunately, I think now we are in a position where most of the physicians and the hospitals, they have mastered the art of treating this COVID vaccine patient. So the type of, I think, intensity what we have seen last year is definitely not there. And particularly in India, in this new, I think the second wave, what we have seen, where, of course, you have said that India and America have reached the same space of more than 100,000 cases per day. But please remember one thing, that for the sheer size of the population in India, which is more than 4 times the US population, our numbers are much less in terms of percentage. And that, having said that, I think I'm quite confident that hereafter, whatever disease that we will be seeing, we will be in a position to contain it by the medicines which are available. And fortunately, as you all very rightly said, that we have started the vaccination. Both US and India have now have a, I think, distinction of immunizing more than about 300 million people. In India, also, I think the government's figure last night I saw was almost about, I think, 85 or 86 million people have been vaccinated already. And I'm quite confident in the coming months, we will be able to immunize sizable amount of population, and that will also help in containing the disease.
Dr. You're on mute.
Yeah, it's difficult to add. Am I audible?
Yes, that's fine.
It's very difficult to add a line or two after, especially after veterans like Dr. Jadhav speak. But nevertheless, we are like kids, new kids on the block. We've been about 25 years in the vaccine industry, especially in India now. Relocated back from the US with training and knowledge and experience. Having developed a wide range of viral vaccines in our portfolio, starting from rabies to rotavirus to the Japanese encephalitis vaccine. We were the first organization, again, to be very innovatively driven, innovation driven, of course, from the start, and having also isolated the Zika virus itself and also the chikungunya virus. So both these are under development right now. But having said all this, it gives us a huge head start in the way in which we look at handling some of these infectious diseases, because that is just our kind of approach that we come to work in order to look at the infections that happen around the world, especially in the developing world. The SARS, again, we had our own experience 10 years ago. Dr. Jadhav can also recall that in 2009, we as a country also had to go through the swine flu pandemic scenario, which kind of like died down. It's a slow death by itself, luckily for all of us. And India at that point of time, again, thanks to the US and the Indo-US collaborative mechanisms that were in place, I do know that Dr. Jadhav could also recall this, that we were, three of our Indian vaccine manufacturers were asked to develop and manufacture the vaccine for swine flu, the H1N1 virus vaccine itself. So this was also done by all the three companies in India, and thanks to the Centers for Disease Control, from where the government of India then could get those strains. So this is an ongoing thing. The SARS and MERS have also come and gone, luckily for us, in lighter forms and impact. But this time around, the SARS-CoV-2 has probably taught us a very, very different way of looking at how the flu, this kind of a pandemic is going to span out. But mutations are not new, because we know both in the US and also in many other parts of the world, and also now in India, the influenza virus is a very classic example of how the changes happen to the system of the virus itself, and accordingly how the vaccine is then developed for the next year based on the new mutation or the variant that has come upon itself. So I think this is going to be a challenge. It is not, there is nothing, I don't see an easy road out there to overcome this, but I think it's just going to be consistent efforts and persistence and just, going behind it. And I think that's the only way forward that we as vaccine developers and manufacturers can look at it at this point of time. Thank you.
I would take away from your comments that we all need to learn to live with and coexist with this virus, right? And then it's probably going to become some kind of a ritual every year or every 2 years. We get a dose like we get the current flu shot. Is it a fair takeaway?
Sanjay, we're not, we can't predict see, that's again another thing, what we know is what we don't know. So I guess it's going to be, it's going to be a 1 day at a time, or a 1 month at a time, or however this is going to progress. But if it goes the influenza way, maybe we are going to be looking at vaccinating ourselves, or at least the endemic regions of the world each year, so that it does not spread and cause more disease burden to the rest of the populations of the world. So I think it's just going to span out in its own way. I don't know if we can predict how this is going to go. There's so many theories out there. So I will just leave it out there for the more science and researchers and all of them to look at, the public health experts, to look at how the epidemiology of this entire virus and the infection is going to span out for us in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. I just feel that we are so much better off having allies like you in this battle. So I'm grateful for both of you and your teams, to support all of us on planet Earth in this epic, I would say, battle with this virus. Moving on from a little bit, to a term that I became familiar with only in the last few months, which is vaccine diplomacy. I don't know, maybe David had a lot of experience with this term as compared to us, I would say, business people, but it has really come to the forefront across the globe. We, of course, saw the Chinese take a very early and very aggressive approach to it. India is successful. India's foreign minister has recently stated that India's vaccine friendship program, or the MIT3 program, has considerably raised India's standing and generated a lot of international goodwill. So I think Dr. Jadhav Serum Institute in particular has played a big role in getting these accolades for India. I know also that some of the manufacturing facilities outside India had difficulties, and you had to ramp up additionally to compensate for problems in facilities in more developed countries. So, I mean, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on what Serum has done, for India to win these accolades around the globe, and how you're contributing to India's vaccine diplomacy.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. I think that itself can become a topic for another, I think, town hall only on the vaccine diplomacy. Yeah, but I think I will give the first credit to start this particular thinking to Gavi and the CP and WHO, because I think it was they who came with this concept of COVAX facility. And the COVAX facility originally was thought that there will be a facility, there will be a fund where Gavi will procure the material and then equitably distribute to all the countries. So it was not only the Gavi eligible countries, which were just about maybe 72 to start with, but then today, even the middle income countries also wants their share from the Gavi. So they became 92. And in reality, now there are 192 countries who have become signatories for the COVAX facility, and they expect material from the COVAX facility for their countries. Although it was an excellent idea, but I think this is not the Serum position, but my personal position, that what has happened in reality, or what was expected to happen, did not happen. Somebody said that my country first, and then the diplomacy started from another part of the world. And then there was I think, total chaos in this particular area, that every country said, my country first. Okay, and that's how I think government India also thought about, and this vaccine diplomacy came out of that. That was not originally thought out, but it became an offshoot of the reactions which happened globally in different parts of the world, both in the developed world as well as in the developing world. Serum was the signatory for the COVAX facility, and in fact, we had signed with the Gates Foundation for supplying of these two vaccines, that is the AstraZeneca vaccine, which we were originally going to develop with Oxford, University and the Novavax vaccine. And for both of them, the Gates Foundation came up and they said that, okay, they will make a contract with Serum Institute and give us some money. And they upfront gave certain amount of money as a part of future supplies which Serum will be making to Gavi. Yeah, so that was an excellent thing which happened because that also helped us in ramping up our financial requirements to increase the facility at that time. I think expecting a pandemic and facing it was always at the back of the mind of all the scientists and specifically from the scientists from WHO. And one of the reasons was they have started I think, GAP program, that is Global Action Plan program, for the development of influenza vaccine, particularly expecting that one day the world will be hit by the bird flu. And although we have not seen, I think, bird flu to the Spanish flu type of situation from 1918, where almost about 500 million people affected, 50 million people died, and in case that happens, there was no capacity and capability which is existing in the world at any place. The only few manufacturers in the West who are using influenza vaccine on the annual basis, they are the only ones who are taking care of the population in the developed world. Because in the developing world, particularly in the Southeast Asia, in Africa, in South America, nobody fears influenza. Because unless you see the death or unless you see the devastating effect of the disease, you are not fearing of the disease. But if you see in last about 15, 20 years, whatever cases of H5N1 or the bird flu, which were transmitted from actual poultry to the human beings, which has come from Southeast Asia, although numbers are not very high, maybe around 2,500 people who were affected, the mortality rate is almost about 65%. So you can imagine that in case really this bird flu epidemic happens, we will not be sitting here discussing. Half of us would have already perished. Because to make a vaccine, it takes certain time. And taking that particular threat in mind, WHO had decided to make certain funds available and make some of the companies prepared to make the influenza vaccine and also the H5N1 vaccine. So that in case the bird flu strikes, it's not only available in the developed world, but also in the developing world in several manufacturing facilities, it could be available. They had given these finances to 11 different manufacturers. Of course, BARDA was part of it, JICA was part of it, WHO was part of it, Gates Foundation was part of it, to give the money to different manufacturers. In reality, today, there are only 2 manufacturers who are making that product. The other manufacturers couldn't make it, or they made it and then they stopped it. Maybe one of the reasons is because they were expecting it to come, because the disease did not come or the infection did not come. People thought that this is a wasteful investment. But now with the COVID experience, I think again everybody has scrambled to develop these facilities. But in influenza, we thought that we will be requiring maybe around 7 billion doses. But today, the type of vaccine that have been developed, and if it is a 2-dose regime to start with, we will require almost about 15 billion doses. And if the 3rd dose is required, then that much additional quantity will be required. And even if you collectively decide to combine all the strength of all pharmaceutical companies who are making a sterile product, still we cannot make that much amount of vaccine. And that's the real challenge. And therefore, unless there is a preparedness from everybody and there is a political support from all the regions, I think it will be very difficult to achieve this particular aim to combat the diseases in future. As far as Serum Institute is concerned, I think when this the first cases came from Wuhan, we decided that, okay, this is something which we'll need to look into. We were already working with the Oxford University for the development of malaria vaccine, and that's why they first, when they developed the product, they came to us, because theirs is a small research lab. They did not have facility to take it on the pilot scale or even on the commercial scale. So they came to us and we said, okay, we will work together. And of course, subsequently it went to AstraZeneca and we had to sign a new contract with AstraZeneca. And that's how we are manufacturing. And as you mentioned it before, AstraZeneca made that contract with 9 different companies. But today, in reality, there are only 2 companies who are in a position to really make some product and make it available. And most of the product, which is now almost about 200 million doses that we had made, is already almost distributed.
Thank you. It was a famous person who said that the US always does the right thing, but usually, it comes last, right? I don't want to cite the exact quote. So I noticed that in the last 48 hours, the US has appointed a coordinator for international vaccine diplomacy and has started ramping up its efforts to take care, of people outside the US to a greater extent. So we saw this. In March when this Quad agreement, which is fairly unique, right? I've been in pharma for almost 30 years. I've never seen country A, B, C, D get together for country A to finance, country B to make and to sell in, to 25 other countries. So it's a very, very unique, and David mentioned it in his opening remarks, that was signed amongst the Quad countries. So yeah. I'm quite curious to know, and maybe Dr. Mrs. Ella and Dr. Yadav, what role, if you anything, you envisage in this Quad agreement, the Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech, I'm guessing as India's pioneers in vaccine would have a role to play. So if you could elaborate, if you participated in this, or are you going to participate, and what role would you have?
No, at the moment, we are not participated in that because we thought that this is mainly with the governments. And the governments will decide, I think, which are the companies who are collaborating already within the Quad countries. And then they will try to sort of help them by giving the grants or giving the other technical help. But I think what as Serum Institute and what as a manufacturer of vaccines, I perceive and I expect from the Quad is that I think the fear that has been created in the minds of various manufacturers that if US really invokes the DPA, then the supplies of the raw materials, the supplies of plasticware, supplies of one-time fermenters, and the chemicals, that should not be a constraint. Because now, as we understand that the US has decided and have announced that by about end of June or by July, they will be in a position to immunize more than almost about, I think, 70–80% of their population. So if their requirement of vaccine is already fulfilled, then they should not restrict the supplies of the raw materials which are coming from the US facilities, which are used by the other vaccine manufacturers globally and particularly in the developing world. Because if we have to make the product, we have to get all these supplies in time. And if that is not assured, then I think again there will be a big question mark, and then we'll have to look for the alternate supplies from other places, which will itself take a long time to get it validated, get the new material validation, vendor validation, process validation, and it's a long time thing to get it again approved from your regulators. So to cut down that time, I think if we could be assured through Quad that these raw material supplies will not be impacted, I think that will be a great contribution from this.
I'd like to just add a couple of points that were crossing my mind in respect to Quad. We at Bharat, again, have not, at this point of time, are not in the process of participating due to very good reasons that I can just name. Ever since when we were stuck with the situation last spring, back in April, we ourselves, within our resources and capabilities, we requested the ICMR and the National Institute of Virology to share the SARS-CoV-2 strain to Bharat, and so that it would enhance our role in developing a vaccine, a potential vaccine candidate, because we know, being in the business, Dr. Jadhav and all of us are, we ride the same boat. The size of the boat may be different sometimes, but the product, the extensive, enormous timelines that it takes in terms of various steps and processes and regulations is just, I mean, I don't want to go on into it because that will take another call by itself. So we rather focused on the strengths that we had as an organization because of the sheer strength of having manufactured more than 300 million doses of viral vaccines in the last decade or so. That I had just earlier mentioned. The rotavirus program is another classic example of the Indo-US Vaccine Action Program, under which Bharat was chosen as the development partner in India to develop the rotavirus vaccine. And India became the first country from the developing world to have developed its own rotavirus vaccine, the strain coming from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, isolated by Dr. Maharaj Kishan Ban. And we showed to the world community that new technology, new innovation, and new vaccine development could also be looked upon. So we were mostly focused on that. And we brought that same thought process when it came to COVID, because we knew that we had to do something about this. But simultaneously, we also partnered with 3 other institutions in the United States. The very first one was the University of Wisconsin in Madison. We are tied up with them for technology partnerships. So we have no dearth for academic research and product development collaborations as such. As Dr. Jadhav mentioned, I mean, the technology and the work done at Oxford coming to Serum, and so like the work that is being done currently in Jefferson and Washington University, St. Louis, is now licensed to us exclusively for us to develop our own platform technologies, which could use different vectors and also thereby deploy more numbers of vaccines, because you just heard Dr. Jadhav mention the billions of doses that we are talking about. So we were very confident in terms of how we could use, we know that all 4 may not work, but at least even if 2 of them were to work, we would have enough supply chain in terms of how we could address this large quantity, mind-boggling rather, because I don't think even on an annual basis we would look at this kind of numbers for each one of our products that both of us have under our portfolio of products. So we know it's, even though we supply to India's universal immunization program, which is probably one of the largest in the world, with 27 million children being the birth cohort in India. We as vaccine manufacturers know that we normally put up 200 million plus doses of vaccine per vaccine, not just all vaccines put together. So there's about maybe a bunch of 15, 20 vaccines we're talking about. So you can imagine the numbers that we are capable of looking at and deploying our resources to come up with these kinds of vaccines for the universal immunization program, not only in India, but also to all the other international agencies that do procure from the Indian manufacturers. I mean, India, again, Dr. Jadhav and I can be very happy to say this, that we in India manufacture and supply and distribute more than 60% of the world's vaccines to the rest of the world, and supplying to India, of course. And 70% of India's vaccines come from the city of Hyderabad, with ourselves and our fellow vaccine other manufacturers in the city. So we know the enormity of this game that we are all into collectively, but we also understand that it's just not going to happen overnight. We need to pool resources, all our strengths across countries and continents. And I think the Indo-US WAP was a phenomenal example of how this can be achieved by countries looking at infectious diseases at large and for public health care. So I think India can play a huge role in this, with the past, drawing from the past experiences that we have, and also looking into the future of building technologies together. As I was just walking into this meeting, we were sitting with our US partners, Oxygen, based out of Pennsylvania, who are here for the last 3 days, discussing about how Covaxin needs to, be also looked at into the other, to take Covaxin into the markets in the US and in the Northern American continent. So we understand that there is enormous efforts, and we would be very eager, and we look forward to partners between countries with mutual with mutual and equally important points to look at, and how to enhance our capabilities because of the enormity of this game. And we can't just do it in one plant or facility. We need to look at multiple facilities within our campuses. Sometimes we have gone and taken away another facility from another product. But again, we can't stop any of these vaccines as well, because most of them are life-saving vaccines for children. So we need to, I think, engage in a larger than country perspective. And I think we need to partner, collaborate, and cooperate and support each other in this fight against COVID. Thank you.
I think David can safely note that vaccine diplomacy will be part of his portfolio in future years, and an increasing part of it. So we have, quite happy to have an expert from the US with us today. It's Jonathan. So Jonathan, we have all read and we've seen China, who has made no secret that vaccine distribution is kind of wrapped up in a global geopolitical strategy. So from your perspective, as a keen participant and observer of US public policy towards healthcare, how do you see vaccine diplomacy coming out of the US, and how can it be kind of strengthened, and what more needs to be done for the US? And if you can add something to be leaders and kind of not leave such a large space to our Chinese friends.
Thank you very much. And can you hear me fine? The connection's okay?
Yeah.
So I think we are at US was in somewhat of not a unique, everyone was facing the same challenges but our political system and the contentious campaign we had, there was so much focus on ensuring that Americans received vaccinations first. It is a very political issue here in the United States, as I think in many countries. But as was mentioned earlier, we are at a point where we're seeing vaccinations increase quite dramatically. And is it expected by sometime in June that we will reach the vast majority of Americans who want vaccines will have access to those vaccines? I do expect at that point, and actually conversations we've had with the administration, I think they are expecting it too, to see an increased role that they will be playing internationally in relation to exporting of vaccines that are developed here, as well as making components for those vaccines available. So I would expect the US vaccine diplomacy to be increasing quite a bit going into the summer, and then by the end of the summer, I think it'll be a very different place than we are today. So I think that counter to some of the vaccine diplomacy we've seen by other large manufacturers, whether it be China or Russia, the US will be an important player in that space as well. And then obviously India is playing a critical role there too. So I think that will be important. If I can maybe sort of reflect a little bit on the comments that were made, because I think what is fascinating to me about the discussion that we've just had is the role that India is playing in the innovative side of bringing these vaccines to the marketplace, both in terms of the value they're bringing to the global population who's desperately in need of these vaccines, but also the real trusted partnership that they've formed with US and European and other manufacturers, because I think many of the challenges we've seen have been about creating that trusted engagement between India and the United States. There's a lot of discussion, I think we'll get to more, about how the US is diversifying its supply chain. And I think India is going to have to play a key role there, and especially in light of the discussions around China. So I think the US vaccine diplomacy is increasing dramatically. I think India can and will play an important partnership role there. And I think that opportunity will help facilitate even stronger relationships between the United States and India in the Asia Pacific region also.
Thanks. I think we stick to the topic about supply chains a little bit now, because it has been a challenge for all companies that trade across borders during this COVID times. In the last year, we saw a big disruption in shipping, in airlines, in transport of goods and transfer and the mobility of people. So the US, as many of us know, relies on India for about 40% of its pharmaceutical supplies. So, Jonathan, from your perspective, how has the supply chain adapted in the last 1 year? Have there been any kind of difficulties, and how have your members, particularly those from India, coped up with this challenge in the last 1 year?
Thank you, Sanjay. I think from the perspective of the whole year, it's held up remarkably well. There was a lot of concern voiced by stakeholders, policymakers early in the pandemic. The expectation was that the generic pharmaceutical supply chain would crash, that the role that China and India were playing in that supply chain and the vulnerabilities because of COVID would see a rupture in the supply chain in the United States. And while, because of the transportation issues you mentioned, particularly I think it was 85% decline in airline transportation, passenger airplanes, which in the belly of those planes, you transport a lot of pharmaceuticals. With that being shut down to such a large degree, we saw a dramatic reduction in the supply of medicines in the United States in March and April of last year. But based on some data analysis we've done, we saw that by the middle of May, the supply of products coming into the United States was actually equal to the supply of products coming in, and specifically pharmaceuticals, equal to what it was prior to COVID. And so we saw the supply chain maybe bend, but it did not break in the United States. And that had a lot to do with, truthfully, some of the important diplomacy that was happening between the Indian government and the US government. I mean, I think we saw early on some export restrictions that were put into place that obviously caused quite a concern in the United States, but there was the dialogue between our president and your prime minister at that time helped ensure that products were moving forward. The intense engagement between the industry. I mean, as you mentioned, Indian companies are playing an incredibly important role in the US healthcare system. As you said, approximately 40% of all medicines approved in the US are coming from Indian companies. And that supply chain that they set up and the contingency plans that they had in place, as well as the stock of API and key components, enabled them to weather that early storm. And so we saw throughout the US very few instances of the pandemic having an impact on access to medicine. Where we did see challenges, truthfully, was related to the distribution in the United States and how it is somewhat of a regionalized distribution system. And so in some places where there are large spikes of COVID sicknesses, you saw patients having lack of access to medicines necessary for incubation and other issues, but it was really a distribution issue as opposed to a supply chain issue, meaning products coming into the United States.
The US is making, Jonathan, a lot of efforts for onshoring production, and they want to start manufacturing finished products in the US. I think we as Indian companies consider India to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem, as we've over the decades proven ourselves to be reliable partners and suppliers, even in tough times like last year, right? So what, if anything, has changed on the onshoring side in the US in terms of, not and how can India be considered, I would say, a trusted partner even more than what it is today?
So it's interesting when the COVID crisis first hit. The debate about onshoring into the United States was already going strong. We saw publication of a couple books in 2019 that sparked some discussion about whether the U.S. should be playing a greater role in its own pharmaceutical supply chain. And so when COVID hit in early 2020, there was already fertile ground for the conversation about, yes, the U.S. should be doing more manufacturing in the United States. And early on in the Trump administration, some of the discussion was the U.S. should be doing all of its own manufacturing. I think where we see the Biden administration, and truthfully a lot of members of Congress have evolved this way too, is the conversation isn't now the U.S. should manufacture everything. The conversation is the U.S. should work with its allies to secure its own supply chain. And this is truthfully where I think India has a really important role to play. When you look at the efforts the Indian government is taking to diversify and produce more API and key starting materials in India, to me that is a real opportunity for the US to work with India on some key priority products to make sure that we have diversified that network of supply. So while maybe previously some of those products the API was coming from China, maybe now it's coming from India. At the same time, I think the value is it's not just India, it's really creating that foundation for a globally diverse supply chain. I see, India came out with its incentive scheme for this API and KSM and 41 priority products. Well, if you compare that to the essential medicines list that the FDA published last October, there are 11 products that are in common. That may be a very good place to start to look at how the US and India can increase its cooperation. So I think India has an important role to play. I think the US, and luckily the conversation has moved to how do we work with our trusted allies around the world, and India should be central to that conversation.
Yeah, honestly, in the past we saw some kind of ad hoc grants. A large one made to I think Kodak. So it seemed a little bit not understandable to I would say industry players like us, but hopefully this and form alliances rather than move into a autarkic world where you try to do everything from soup to nuts by itself. And it's really not practical because it's hard to set up from scratch. One of the challenges last year was that we were facing was that the trucks in India in our factories were not moving. We had a lot of difficulties moving goods from locations within India. We had a lot of difficulty moving goods outside India into India. So Dr. Jadhav and Ms. Vela, last year while the world was kind of slowing down, you guys are ramping up, right? And you were never been busier. You never needed more things. So, if you could spend a couple of minutes just explain to us that, how did you overcome this supply chain challenge in these extraordinary times? I guess you've never been busier and the world has never been slower, right? So, this dichotomy, if you could just talk about it over the last 12 months as to, what were the, things that kept you going or made you successful?
Sanjay, I think initially what happened was, I think everybody was shocked. And particularly, I think when the government of India and the Prime Minister Modi started off with the lockdowns, I think that was the time when we thought that we will have to wait and watch the situation. But fortunately, one thing they did, and which has helped the pharma industry in India, was the pharmaceutical industry was exempted from shutting down and reducing the number of staff. They were allowed to keep running and producing what they are producing. And all the necessary permissions which were required from the local administration or from the regulatory agencies were immediately available for companies to keep the work on. This was not only for the existing work, but also they expedited the process for developing the COVID vaccines. That has certainly helped us. But at the same time, because of the total disruption at that time of the transport facilities, not within the countries, but outside, uh, international agencies who were procuring products from the various manufacturers, that was impacted. So I will say that almost about 25 to 28% less offtake was there by the international agencies. That means the normal routine vaccination program, the EPI programs with other countries were also impacted. They were also impacted in India. And that's how WHO was extremely concerned. And there are now figures that the measles is coming back in several countries because the measles vaccination program where they wanted to switch over from the existing measles to MR or MMR vaccine, that was impacted. So although I think I can just give the example of Serum Institute that we were making almost about more than 1.5 billion doses for last 3 years. We had supplied more than 1.5 billion doses globally and also within India. But last year, that figure has come down by almost about 25%. So that was mainly happened because most of the countries where the campaigns were going to happen, those campaigns were cancelled or they need to be cancelled because there was no transportation and no facilities for the vaccinators to go from one place to another. And that has certainly, I think, will have a long-term effect on the health of the newborns which are born last year. Hopefully that situation will change now this year, but how much it will change needs to be seen because we have not yet seen the total normalcy in the offtake either by PAHO or UNICEF or Gavi to the same level as it was there in 1990. So till we reach to that position, we will not be in a position to make a comment that we have gone back to the normalcy.
I would like to just share our experiences again through the last 12 months. April, of course, was extremely shocking since almost all of us were on a kind of a shutdown mode. We were frozen, rather, in terms of how to react and how to, counter this entire situation around us. But nevertheless, we never had a lockdown. As Dr. Jadhav said, being a part of the life sciences, pharma, biotech sector, we were exempted from the lockdown laws of the country. But as much as it was difficult for us, because it's all plant operations. I mean, there's nothing that any one of us vaccine manufacturers can do remotely, other than maybe writing a few documents or a few letters to our agencies across the world. So everything happens on campus. We did have logistics challenges, even in terms of, and most of us, at least in my case, I can say that we are located 40 to 50 kilometers outside the city of Hyderabad. You can imagine transporting logistically the daily routine of transporting almost close to 2,000 employees back and forth in 4 shifts because of the pandemic and the social distancing and all that. So this was like an internal, logistics issues, but still it was also taxing upon us because, again, we could not shut down some of the other vital critical vaccines which had to be supplied, though there was a dip in the offtake. but and our marketing force. I mean, we have 400. We have probably India's largest vaccine marketing field force all across the country. 400 of them were sitting, were actually asked to stay home because they can't move about, and the hospitals and the doctors and the clinics were also almost shut, but for emergencies and maybe deliveries and such. So our field force was literally at home. Apart from that, our own transportation, after which I think after June, July, August, September, slowly things started trickling up, going up a little bit in terms of how we could ship out some of our products. Most of it is also air cargoed. By then, I think, again, thanks to, coming under the essential services of being vaccines and, in public health, most of our shipments were not put on hold, or, within the country also, we ship all across the country to in India, from the north to the south and east to the west. So we have been, there have been delays. The roads, the road surface logistics were completely shut down. It took a while for the logistics providers to come back on track. Even they were willing to do it, but then their own human resources and the people who had to be deployed in their warehouses and in their trucks to drive them across the country were all gone and or moved back into their hometowns. So all these issues have gone through. We, I think, relatively were also not very badly affected in terms of how we performed for the year ending March 31st. In fact, of course, we have doubled our working timelines and resources. A lot of it has been diverted to the COVID vaccine development. We have about 300 to 400 personnel completely engaged in this day-to-day activity across 24/7. And our own other products also have been later on through the year have been moved out into the country and abroad. So I would call it, yes, it was a very tough, challenging year in terms of managing logistics, not only for our products, but also for our personnel. But I guess in the larger interest of public health, I think all of us had to pull up our socks. And even people like me or Krishna or our senior other directors and people, we were in the facilities, in the campus, in order to ensure that we have the whole team to work collectively and more efficiently, because we really had to burn the midnight oil. But thanks to the government really kicked in. I think Dr. Jadhav would also agree with me on this, by almost being there 24/7. Pre-COVID, it would be us trying to go into the government offices in Delhi or physically. But during this last 1 year, it was all virtual calls and video calls, and also round the clock. I mean, Saturdays and Sundays, the regulator and the agencies in Delhi, the ministries in Delhi, talking to us, calling us, asking us about how we are getting our, putting our operational aspects together, and in terms of understanding what else needed to be done, how to maybe cut short some of the regulatory framework in terms of the timelines, not cutting short, but cutting short the timelines that are required, since our vaccines go for testing in Himachal Pradesh. Every batch of our vaccines go up to a laboratory in Himachal Pradesh for testing, until which we do not release them to the outside world. So, I mean, it's been a complete different side of the coin that we probably have encountered. But I think being in public health, I think this pushes us to think differently and to think out of the box and to be there for the Indian the children, the adult population that needs the vaccines, not only in India, but also to all those international agencies and the rest of the world, the countries that procure from manufacturers like Serum and Bharat. Thank you.
I think my key takeaway is that when a US patient gets a generic pharmaceutical from the pharmacy, or when an Indian person gets vaccinated, actually we don't realize the extraordinary efforts that have gone behind to make sure that product is available even in these challenging times. And the other key takeaway is that, thanks to the collaboration between governments, as Jonathan mentioned, the diplomacy between India and the US, as well as that kept the supply chain flowing. Despite countries being focused on their own populations, they kept the other countries' interests in mind. So, and I'm very impressed by what you have shared with us about the collaboration with the government of India. Maybe we take a couple of questions coming from the audience at this point in time, especially of the themes that we've already developed. So the first question is about the vaccine diplomacy. Is India's vaccine diplomacy hurting its own fight against COVID? So, Dr. Jadhav, Mrs. Ella, any comments? Is vaccine diplomacy, how does it get balanced with our own needs? What is your view or on that?
I think, in a way, yes, because I think there is tremendous demand from the general public that vaccines should be made available openly to anybody and everybody. And to do that, I think the amount of sheer number of doses which will be required are huge. As on today, that number is not being manufactured, because whatever is manufactured every day is almost being consumed. So adding additional number of people in the group, what the government has already added, is really going to be a challenge till both of us, that is we and Bharat and other manufacturers who are in pipeline, who are already in phase 3, if they come up with their product or the other products which are already licensed outside, they are registered by our regulatory agencies. The vaccine diplomacy hereafter is going to be I think, little far away, because if we do not have product to take care of our own people, it will be difficult to give it outside.
Okay. There's another question linked to regulatory collaboration across countries. So, Jonathan, maybe you can address this one. So, what is happening for the FDA and the other regulators, particularly in India, the Drug Controller's Office or the Central Scientific Organization, for them to work closely so that there can be faster harmonization, faster approval across a broader set of countries in the context of vaccines or even more broadly pharmaceuticals?
Thank you. I think moving towards, for example, a mutual recognition agreement between the FDA and the Drug Controller's Office in India would be very difficult. The US FDA has one of these MRAs really in effect, and that's with Europe, and that was after a very, very long time of negotiations. I think truthfully, for that, the depth of cooperation to accelerate with the two regulatory authorities, I think the FDA is looking for stronger actions and more resources devoted towards the issues of quality. I mean, as much as the value in the US-India pharmaceutical relationship, where the value where it is today, there's still a perception, and I think it's interesting because if 40% of the medicines people are taking in the United States are from India, people don't realize they're taking medicines from India, but there's a perception of quality issues. And we run into that both in terms of patients' view of this, but also policy views, and even within the FDA. And so I think increasing that focus and the collaboration on issues of quality and inspections would be very important. I think everybody is aware that during this last year, the inspections of foreign facilities by the FDA has basically come to a standstill. And so we're seeing a huge backlog on those inspections now, which creates both a challenge and maybe an opportunity for collaboration, and how we move that forward in that type of collaboration will be important. But I think it would be the continuation of the exchange of scientific knowledge and information is probably where the focus should be, as opposed to trying to move towards some type of a mutual recognition agreement that I know has been talked about in some contexts. And so I would just encourage that exchange of ideas and partnership and depth of engagement rather than trying to suggest that type of MRA, because I was involved from the industry side with between the US and the EU, and it was a very difficult negotiation. And so I think that India is a long way off from having that possibility of a partnership with the US FDA now.
Yeah, that seems like a good suggestion. From our own experience in the Indian generic industry, right? So we see like the FDA prioritizing COVID and everything else is taken a backseat, a little bit like what we saw with the vaccine scenario with COVID taking over. We had other public health emergencies which got neglected. So I don't know, from the perspective of the Association of Affordable Medicine, should the FDA add to its resources, or what is the kind of counsel that you're giving to the FDA, or the efforts that you're making, so that we don't get one crisis and we come out of it, but we met with 3 other crises that we ignored in the time being, right?
This is a top of our agenda, as you can imagine, with the FDA, is ensuring that they get up to speed and that they reduce that backlog of product, because we want to see as many competitive generics and biosimilars get into the marketplace as possible. But we're seeing, because of resource constraints, as well as travel constraints and concerns around COVID, that those inspections have fallen far behind, and we're seeing a backlog. So I think we are constantly having those conversations with the FDA about how they can increase resources devoted to approving new ANDAs and new biosimilar applications as well. But it's a difficult situation for all regulators around the world in terms of times of this crisis. But I can assure you that conversations are very detailed right now. A lot of talk about how we are pushing forward and trying to encourage that to happen quickly.
I think I would be amiss if I don't raise some controversial issues with all of you. So over the last few decades, we saw that there was a lot of contentious issues between India and the US, specifically linked to patents, tariffs, and there was a general sense that the two countries were not getting along in the field of pharmaceuticals and had divergent interests with big pharma, innovative pharma from the US and generic. Has the situation in your perspectives, changed? Is the overall kind of environment more conducive to collaboration, or are we still carrying with us remnants of the old historical legacy, points of disagreement? So maybe we start with Dr. Jadhav and Ella, and then Jonathan for his perspective from the US.
I think grossly, when the government of India had signed the WTO agreement and became part of that whole system, I have not seen a single case as far as the vaccines are concerned where there was a dispute. Indian manufacturers recognize the patents, and if we want to get into the product which is already existing, we try not to violate that patent which is existing and try to skirt around and find out a different technology to achieve the final goal. But having said so, I think there had been several instances when there is a need, then I think whether it is US or any other government, then they don't care about the patents. We have seen that during the H1N1 conflict, when some of the products which were procured even from the Indian companies, they were not licensed by US FDA, but the products were procured. They had also procured a lot of, I think, expired smallpox vaccine from a Swiss company, which was in their cold storage for 30 years by paying a huge quantity of money, expecting that the vaccine will still work in case there is a bioterrorism attack with the smallpox. So I think when it comes to our own protection, people really do not really care whether you are violating a patent or you are only opposing a patent. There were cases like what has happened with the AIDS development or its product development in Africa by CIPLA, or there were few instances with the anti-cancer products where the compulsory licenses were issued by, say, Indian patent institutes. There was hue and cry, but I think it subsided because in real sense, there was not so much of a requirement and it didn't affect the marketing capabilities of the product, which was developed by the original manufacturer in US or in Europe. Yes, there were ripples, but it was not felt across the industry to the extent that it was to be discussed and debated over a long period of time. So in general, I will say that everybody now recognizes that patents do exist, patents needs to be respected. And at least in the vaccine sphere, I have not seen any violation on the patent side.
I would start off on that same note where Dr. Jadhav just left off. Like I said again, for the last 25 years, for Bharat has been innovation and technology building. And our entire focus when we came back to India itself was with a huge change in the mindset that we brought back when we started out by saying that we are not here to, we are here to respect intellectual property rights, be it of an academic institution or another organization, a commercial organization, or a manufacturer, or a company, or an R&D company. So we started out in that note. And for us, I think, as Dr. Jadhav also pointed out, that in the vaccine segment, we as manufacturers, ours, like we started off with hepatitis B. And I can remember even way back in 1998, which being the first product for us, so far we have established our own in biotechnology. The process patents have to be established. The product can be the same, the end product will be the same, but the process patent can be proved differently without violation of an existing product of the same nature end product. We have many instances in our industry, many vaccines which have been developed and have been manufactured and being distributed around the world by many multinationals out there from Europe and from the United States or from Japan for that matter. But we as manufacturers in India, especially in the vaccines and biotherapeutic molecules, have been extremely good in developing new technologies and process-driven areas have come into it. Our own academic institutions have partnered with some of us in the past. We, for example, at Bharat have never believed in the generic model. And there is nothing like a biogeneric model for us in the biotech space. So we have been very clear that is how the rotavirus vaccine program itself started off in 2000. And the product launch happened sometime 15 years later in 2015. So it goes to show that Indian companies, young, innovative, scientifically driven, technology driven companies also started coming on to the board and then partnered with international agencies like the CDC and the NIH and the institutions in the United States or institutions in Europe, and with partners with institutions in India like the All India Institute of Medical Sciences or the government of India itself. The DBT was a facilitator and a collaborator in this partnership, which almost had more than 30 to 40 institutions from around the world that came together in order to bring about the best of technology building and product building for not only for India, but for the world at large. So this goes to show that I think Indian life sciences, specifically the biotech and the vaccine manufacturing sector, is very competent, is very very scientifically driven, and can also has the capabilities to partner with multiple institutions across the world. And even now in COVID, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, we have three different institutions, academic institutions from the United States partnering with us for just COVID vaccines. And not to forget the NIV partnership, which is our own organization and entity from under the Government of India, under the ICMR, that we as public-private partnerships have been a great driving force for those of us in the industry. And we have not had any, in fact, all of us have products which are which almost address the same disease burden, whether it is chickenpox or whether it is hepatitis or whether it is rotavirus or whether it is rabies. But we also have gone ahead and shown that we will compete on technology, and we are also very competitive in our scale up, in our volumes, and we are also extremely competitive in our pricing. I think that the Indian vaccine industry has demonstrated over and over again. I just would like to end by saying that very recently, GSK has transferred its malaria vaccine project to Bharat Biotech. And we will be taking on this project completely. The tech transfer will be happening shortly. We are building new greenfield projects in another state in India. So we will be handling an extremely high technology, intensively driven by intellectual property rights and patents, but without having enough room and having enough abilities on our side to ensure that this entire program will be done and taken forward in a very successful manner in the coming decade. So I think it goes to show that Indian industry at large, especially in the life sciences sector, there are issues. Even if I have to say this, the largest number of US FDA plants exist outside of the US exist in India. I think that's known to all of us in this panel. It goes to show that the commitment is there, the change will happen, and everybody now knows that what the future requires and how we could all collaborate in a more meaningful and effective manner to combat diseases and the disease burden that we have around us in the world. Thank you.
So Jonathan, a few words about the view from Washington.
And it's actually, I don't think I've ever heard more of a compelling case of why creating a balanced approach to IP and innovation and access to medicines than was just made about Bharat Biotech. I mean, you see India as a country that both encourages competition through access to generics, as well as allowing innovative medicine to flourish. And I think that understanding, you're actually seeing a greater understanding of that viewpoint in Washington as well. And so I do think that the pressure on India and the tensions in the US-India relationship around issues related to pharmaceutical IP are probably lessening. And I say that because you see within the US political dialogue, Republicans and Democrats who for decades were reflexively pro-pharmaceutical IP and strengthening and extending the patent protection, the exclusivity protection for those medicines as long as possible, that sort of orthodoxy is beginning to break. And you're seeing it in both Republicans and Democrats in Congress who are saying we need to do more to increase competition in the off-patent sector to help bring prices down. And so I think that policy perspective was reflected in the Trump administration, and the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement reflects that actually. the most balanced approach to pharmaceutical IP we've seen to date in a trade agreement. And the Biden administration, I think this is maybe a hope and a think and a belief that they're going to be taking that more nuanced, balanced approach to trade policy moving forward. Catherine Tai, as the new U.S. trade representative, was instrumental in sort of reforming the text of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, and understanding the value of balancing IP and access to medicine. And so I think the pressure that maybe you saw from the U.S. government on the Indian government related to compulsory licenses or Section 3D of the India Patent Act will probably be less going forward than it was in the past. And I think that allows for a much more robust and full conversation about how our countries can partner to promote greater access to affordable medicine in the United States and greater security between our two countries for the pharmaceutical supply chain.
So on that optimistic note, I would just like to conclude by stating that it seems to me my key takeaway from our today's discussion is that I hope all of us are convinced that while India and the US are amongst the worst affected countries for COVID-19, but they are also the two most effective partners to lead and coordinate a global pandemic vaccine response, as well as future healthcare challenges, including collaborating on drug discovery, clinical trials, and a robust, resilient supply chain across the globe. So with that takeaway, I would like to thank everyone, particularly the U.S. Consulate, David Rance and Amrita from the Consulate, the CII teams who put together this lovely program and who has taken a lot of initiatives to strengthen this collaboration. Sri Kumar Nair, Achuyet, Akansha, Suzanne, and Sushita, and of course our esteemed groups of panelists today, Jonathan, Dr. Jadhav, Mrs. Ella, and lastly, all of you for taking time out this morning in the US for participating in this, I would say, very interesting and timely discussion. So thanks a lot. I think Suchita, can we conclude the program for today, or is there anything else?
Absolutely. With our thanks to everybody for joining, the program is now closed, and we look forward to staying connected. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was very, very good. Congrats, guys.
Was this Amrita? Can we see you? Can we see the baby?
The baby is not with